The sea breathes in silence. Waves roll like ancient drums beneath the silver moon. Far below, coral gardens shimmer with hidden light. This is where the story begins, not in war, but in wonder. Long ago, gods walked close to mortals, unseen yet near. Among them was Poseidon, ruler of tides and keeper of storms. He was not always fierce, nor always loud. Sometimes he listened, sometimes he whispered, and when he did, the oceans answered. Sailors feared his wrath, yet children dreamed of his songs. The sea, they believed, carried messages in its endless flow. Every wave held a secret, every ripple a memory. One night, the waters stirred with a strange sound. Not thunder, not rage, but voices, gentle and low, weaving through streams and rivers. They were like secrets carried by the wind, soft and insistent. People leaned close to wells and fountains, hearing faint echoes. The whispers were not warnings, but invitations. Invitations to listen, to understand, to walk in harmony with the endless tide. This is the tale of Poseidon and the whispering floods. Beneath the endless waves, silence lingered like a hidden hymn of the deep. The palace of Poseidon stood vast, carved from coral, pearl, and shimmering stone. Columns rose high, touched by light that filtered gently from above. Fish swam in circles, painting the halls with silver and gold. The sea god sat upon his throne, trident resting at his side. He did not speak, he listened. For the ocean carried countless voices, soft and secret, flowing in every tide. Each current told a story, each ripple carried a memory of time. Poseidon's eyes closed as he leaned into the murmur of the sea. He heard the laughter of dolphins as they danced between waves. He heard the crackle of reefs alive with tiny creatures unseen. He heard the hush of sand shifting gently beneath the pull of the moon. The ocean was alive, and it spoke in endless tongues. To mortals, water was simple: to drink, to fish, to cross. But to Poseidon, it was a choir of whispers, a living breath of eternity. He traced his hand across the surface of a pool by his throne. The water answered with ripples that shimmered like threads of silver. They were not storms today. They were not thunder. They were gentle voices rising from the quiet floor of the sea. Poseidon smiled, faint but true, for he understood what others did not. The sea did not only roar in anger, it could whisper in peace. It could tell stories no mortal ear had yet heard. And on this day, the waters seemed restless, though not with fury. The whispers grew stronger, gathering like wind before dawn. They circled his palace, brushed against the coral walls, slipped through the gates. He leaned closer, listening as though the sea itself had secrets to confess. The whispers carried hints of faraway shores touched by gentle waves. They spoke of rivers winding through forests, carrying leaves downstream. They spoke of streams, where children laughed, playing with stones and water. They spoke of wells where women drew water, listening without knowing. The voices were not frightening. They were soft. They were insistent. Poseidon realized that the ocean was trying to speak not only to him. It longed to be heard by the world above. The mortals had forgotten how to listen to the tides. They rushed, they built, they took, and they forgot the song of water. Now the sea called out, hoping someone might hear again. The god of the sea sighed, his breath stirring the currents around his throne. He thought of the fragile balance between land and ocean. He thought of rivers flowing to meet the tide, like friends reuniting. He thought of clouds gathering rain to return as blessing upon the earth. Every drop was part of the same story, every flood a page of memory. Yet mortals saw only the surface, not the song beneath. Poseidon resolved to send the whispers beyond the deep, not as storms, not as waves of fear, but as invitations. He would let the floods carry voices gentle as dreams, voices that asked not for worship, but for listening. The palace lights shimmered brighter as the waters began to stir. Fish darted quickly, sensing a change in the heartbeat of the sea. The currents shifted, not wild but purposeful, carrying whispers outward. Poseidon raised his gaze to the surface far above. Somewhere, beyond reefs and waves, mortals would soon hear. Not thunder, not rage, but the quiet voice of the ocean. And thus began the first stirrings of the whispering floods. A murmur rose within the depths, drifting like threads of sound woven into the water's flow. It was faint at first, like wind moving through reeds or a sigh across glass. The sound did not thunder nor crash, but curled soft, weaving through the coral halls. Poseidon tilted his head, eyes narrowing, for this was no ordinary voice of the tide. It was smaller, lighter, carrying weight not of storms, but of secrets. The god leaned closer to the rippling pool beside his throne. The whispers lingered, echoing from unseen places far beyond his sight. They spoke not in one tongue, but in many, shifting with every wave. Sometimes the voice was like rain falling on stone. Sometimes it was like leaves carried gently down a forest stream. Other times it sounded like a lullaby hummed by mothers drawing water. Poseidon listened as the waters trembled with a strange urgency. The ocean rarely spoke so insistently, so insistent without anger or rage. This was not the cry of floods, but the song of remembrance. The whispers told of lands above, where wells trembled with faint voices. They told of rivers carrying soft echoes to villages built by their banks. Children heard laughter in fountains, though no one stood nearby. Fishermen felt strange warmth in nets, as if the sea spoke through their catch. The waters longed to be heard not as tools, but as kin. Poseidon traced the air above his pool, and the whispers grew clearer. They spoke of forgotten covenants between mortals and the tide. Once, long ago, humans sang to rivers before drawing their water. They offered shells to the sea before sailing upon its waves. They listened to the tide's rhythm as if it were the heart of the earth. But in the rush of time, mortals forgot. The voices of the sea were left unheard, buried beneath noise and haste. The ocean still remembered, carrying every song and prayer in its depth. Now it reached out again, weaving whispers into floods that touched the land. Poseidon rose from his throne, trident shimmering with light of the currents. He stepped through the halls of his palace, where dolphins turned to watch. The whispers followed him, curling through arches, sliding along the stone. Every step he took, the sea seemed to hum with deeper sound. The god paused, looking upward toward the surface far above. Somewhere, mortals were leaning close to wells and streams, puzzled by strange voices. Perhaps they wondered if the sound was wind or imagination. But it was neither. It was the sea, calling to them, gently, persistently, without rage. Poseidon felt the longing in the whispers, as though they carried emotion. It was not sorrow nor joy, but a plea for connection. The waters desired to be known again as living, as sacred. They did not wish for temples of stone, but for respect and harmony. The sea god's heart softened, for even divinity could feel the ache of neglect. He placed his hand on the current, sending a thought outward. "Let the mortals hear," he whispered in return. "Let them remember the bond that once was shared." The pool shimmered, its ripples glowing faintly like moonlight on dark water. The whispers carried his intent outward, beyond reefs, beyond shoals. They followed rivers upward, winding their way into streams and fountains. Somewhere, a child paused at a well, tilting her head to listen. Somewhere, a shepherd by a brook heard notes among the flowing water. Somewhere, a traveler filled his flask and felt a voice brush his heart. The sea was speaking, and for the first time in ages, the world above began to listen. Poseidon lowered his hand and closed his eyes, at peace with the tide's work. The whispers were no longer faint, but strong, echoing across distance. The sea had found its voice again, not in storms, but in gentle floods. And Poseidon knew this was only the beginning of the message to come. High upon the surface, where waves touched the edge of land, a village rested quietly by the shore. Its roofs were made of clay, its walls of stone, and its people lived close to the rhythm of the sea. The villagers rose with the sun, mended nets, and drew water from streams that ran down from the hills. Children laughed by the wells, tossing pebbles into the clear water, listening for the splash. But lately the wells had begun to echo with something strange, something soft and unexplainable. When buckets sank into the dark, voices seemed to stir within the depths. Not shouts, not cries, but gentle sounds, like distant songs carried from the tide. Some villagers dismissed it as wind whistling through the stone edges of the well. Others grew uneasy, whispering that spirits might live below the water. Yet the children did not fear. They leaned closer, smiling, placing their ears against the cool rim to hear better. One child in particular, a girl with curious eyes, seemed to hear most clearly. She returned to the well each day, pressing her ear to the bucket as it rose. She swore she could hear words hidden inside the sound of dripping water. The elders shook their heads, warning her not to speak nonsense. But she insisted, describing voices like rivers telling their secrets in sleep. At night, she dreamed of the sea glowing with light, calling her by name. The villagers gathered to discuss these strange events, their faces solemn in the firelight. Some said it was a sign of blessing, others feared it might be a warning. The fishermen told of nets filled not with fish, but with shimmering shells unusual for the season. The women spoke of jars filled at the stream that seemed to echo faintly when lifted. Everywhere, the water was speaking, though no one could agree on what it meant. Still, the child returned, fearless, listening patiently as if she alone understood the song. She whispered to her friends that the water was alive, that it carried messages from far away. Her words spread, and soon even the skeptical began to lean closer when drawing their water. Some heard nothing, only silence, but others caught faint melodies like threads of wind. It was as if the sea was testing them, choosing who was willing to hear. One evening, when the moon was full, the whispers grew stronger in the village well. The child leaned close and for the first time understood a sentence in clear words. It was not a command, nor a threat, but a request. Listen. Her heart raced as she turned to the others, repeating what she had heard. Some laughed nervously, others grew pale, yet none could dismiss her voice completely. The following days, more villagers reported strange echoes from fountains and streams. The whispers spread through every path of water, gentle but insistent. The sea was reaching out, its call winding through every drop that touched their lives. And though many doubted, the child believed with all her heart. She felt chosen, as if the sea itself had trusted her with its voice. She began to speak softly to the wells in return, offering greetings and small songs. Her words carried into the water, and the whispers seemed to answer with greater clarity. The villagers watched, unsure whether to fear or to hope. But deep within the earth, the waters had begun to awaken with purpose. The sea was no longer silent. It had found ears willing to listen, and through a single child, its story had begun to take root. Far out in the shimmering blue, a dolphin leapt through the waves, carrying a message not of words, but of song. Its sleek body cut through the tide with grace, leaving trails of silver foam behind. This was no ordinary dolphin, but a messenger chosen by Poseidon himself. For when gods wished to be heard, they often spoke through creatures beloved by the sea. The dolphin turned toward the coast, guided not by instinct alone, but by a pull from the whispers. It swam swiftly, faster than the current, as though destiny hurried it toward the waiting village. Beneath the surface, other dolphins followed, weaving in arcs, humming in harmony. Their voices carried melodies that rose above the waves like echoes of flutes. At dawn, the villagers spotted fins breaking the water just beyond the bay. Children pointed and laughed, rushing to the shore with excitement in their eyes. Fishermen paused, nets heavy in their hands, watching with quiet curiosity. The dolphins came closer, circling the shallows as though performing a dance for the people. Their leaps glittered in the sun, arcs of joy painted against the morning sky. But there was more than play in their movement. The villagers soon noticed the rhythm, the careful pattern of circles and dives. It was a message, though none could yet decipher its meaning. The curious child stepped forward, her heart racing, for she felt the pull of the sea. She waded into the shallows, the water cool around her ankles, eyes locked on the dolphin. One dolphin swam closer, pausing as if to meet her gaze. Its dark eyes shone with a spark that seemed more than animal, more than instinct. It let out a series of sharp clicks and soft whistles, echoing across the bay. The child listened, tilting her head, as though words were hidden in the sound. Behind her, the villagers whispered nervously, wondering if this was a sign or a warning. The dolphin arched its back, splashing water that glittered in the light like scattered jewels. And then the whispers came again, not from the well, but from the sea itself. The tide lapped at the shore, carrying faint voices that blended with the dolphin's song. The villagers gasped, stepping back, but the child stood firm, listening intently. The dolphin's song rose higher, and the whispers grew clearer, weaving into harmony. It was as if the ocean had chosen a chorus to carry its voice. The child closed her eyes and repeated softly what she understood. "Listen." The villagers fell silent, their fear mixing with wonder, their hearts drawn to the sound. The dolphins circled again, then stilled, floating close as if awaiting a response. The child knelt, her hand brushing the tide, and whispered back into the water. The dolphins chirped in reply, and for a moment it seemed the sea itself smiled. The whispers grew stronger, like a tide rolling inward, filling every heart with its presence. Even those who doubted could no longer deny the strange music surrounding them. The dolphin leapt high, and the villagers saw sunlight gleam upon its back like a blessing. It was then they understood this was no chance meeting, but a visit with purpose. Poseidon had sent his messenger, not with thunder, but with joy and melody. The dolphins were bridges between worlds, voices of the sea carried into human ears. The villagers bowed their heads, not in fear, but in reverence for the gift before them. And the child, with her steady voice and patient heart, became their guide to understanding. That morning, the bond between sea and village deepened, woven with song instead of storm. The dolphins lingered in the bay, promising through their presence that the whispers were real. And as the sun climbed higher, the people knew their lives were about to change forever. The child awoke before dawn, her heart stirring with a pull she could not ignore. The whispers had followed her into dreams, calling softly through rivers of light. She slipped quietly from her home, leaving the village still wrapped in slumber. Her bare feet pressed against the cool sand as she walked toward the well. The bucket hung still, swaying gently as though waiting for her arrival. She leaned over, staring into the dark water, her reflection rippling with every breath. And then she heard it, clearer than ever before. The voice of the floods. It was not thunder, not rage, but gentle tones weaving through silence. "Child," it seemed to say, "you have listened where others turned away." Her eyes widened, for the sound no longer felt like a dream, but a truth. She whispered back, her voice trembling, "I hear you." The wells shimmered, and the whispers deepened, carrying words like waves across her mind. "We are the waters, the rivers, the seas. We flow through life, and life flows through us." The child pressed her hand to the stone rim, heart racing with awe. The whispers grew stronger, filling the air as if the well itself breathed. "Do not fear us," they said. "We come not to take, but to remind." The child felt a warmth rise within her, as though the sea had touched her soul. She asked softly, "Why me? Why do I hear when others cannot?" The water stirred, its ripples dancing with silver light unseen by other eyes. "Because you listen," the floods replied. "Because your heart is quiet enough to hear." The child closed her eyes, letting the voice settle within her spirit. Visions rose before her, rivers glistening under sun, waves folding gently into sand. She saw forests drinking rain, clouds drifting across wide skies, and streams feeding fields. Every drop was part of a great circle, each moment tied to another. When she opened her eyes, she felt as though she carried the ocean inside her. The village awoke slowly, smoke curling from chimneys, roosters calling to the dawn. The child ran to the square, breathless, gathering the elders with urgency. Her words spilled out, telling of voices that spoke not of fear, but of memory. She told them of the circle of water, of rivers, rain, and sea as one. The elders listened, some with skepticism, others with wonder stirring in their eyes. The fishermen leaned closer, recalling the warmth they felt in their nets. The women exchanged glances, remembering the echoes within their jars of water. The village was divided, torn between belief and doubt. But the child's voice carried sincerity that none could deny. "Listen," she begged. "The waters are not warning us of danger. They are asking us to remember." The square grew quiet, the people uneasy yet moved by her conviction. One elder finally spoke, his voice steady but curious. "If what you say is true, child, then what do the waters ask of us?" The child lowered her gaze, then whispered softly, "Respect, harmony, to live with them, not against them." Her words hung in the air like a gentle tide washing over the crowd. The villagers murmured, uncertain, but none dismissed her as before. For deep inside, each had felt the strange whispers in their own way. The dolphins still lingered near the shore, their presence too clear to ignore. The sea had spoken, and through the smallest of them, its message reached the village. That day, the child became not only a listener, but a bridge between worlds. And though the elders had not yet decided what to believe, they knew one thing was certain. The ocean was no longer silent, and their village would never again live untouched by its voice. The day after the child's revelation, the village gathered by the shore under a pale morning sun. The air was heavy with curiosity, carrying both doubt and wonder in equal measure. Fishermen stood with nets over their shoulders, their eyes fixed on the still water. Mothers held their children close, whispering stories of the sea's moods and mysteries. The elders took their places in a circle, their silence deep but not dismissive. The child walked forward slowly, her small steps leaving soft prints on the wet sand. She felt the weight of every gaze upon her, yet the whispers steadied her heart. The dolphins lingered beyond the bay, surfacing now and then with graceful arcs. They seemed to wait, as if aware of the moment about to unfold. The child raised her hand slightly, palms open to the sea breeze. She spoke not loudly, but with a clarity that carried across the shore. "The waters speak," she said, "and they ask us to listen with more than our ears." The villagers leaned closer, their skepticism tempered by her calm conviction. She told them again of the circle, of rivers that feed fields, and rain that feeds rivers. She spoke of tides that cleanse shores, and clouds that carry the sea into the sky. The elders exchanged glances, for her words carried a truth older than memory. One fisherman stepped forward, weathered face marked with years upon the sea. "I have felt it," he admitted. "The warmth in my nets, the pull in the tide." A woman added softly, "The jars of water sang when I filled them. I thought it was only me." One by one, voices rose, each confessing quiet experiences once dismissed. The child listened, nodding, for every story was part of the greater song. At last, an elder lifted his staff, speaking in a tone that silenced the crowd. "If the waters call us, then how shall we answer?" The child turned her gaze to the dolphins, who swam in a slow circle. They leapt in rhythm, their bodies catching sunlight like living mirrors of the waves. The whispers stirred, rising from the shore, weaving through the dolphins' song. The villagers felt it, a harmony wrapping around them like an unseen embrace. The child spoke gently. "We answer by remembering, by honoring what sustains us." Her words carried more than instruction. They carried the essence of the sea itself. The people lowered their heads, sensing the weight of her meaning. They thought of the wells that quenched their thirst, the rivers that fed their crops. They thought of storms that had frightened them, yet also nourished the land. An old woman, voice trembling, asked, "What if we forget again?" The child's eyes softened. "The sea will remind us, not with anger, but with whispers." Silence spread across the shore, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves. The dolphins swam closer, so near the villagers could see their eyes glisten. One dolphin surfaced, clicking and chirping, its voice almost human in tone. The whispers joined it, echoing words the villagers could nearly understand. "Together," it seemed to say, "together we flow. Together we endure." The villagers gasped, some with tears in their eyes, others with wide-eyed awe. For in that moment, disbelief dissolved like mist before the sun. The sea was alive, and it had chosen to speak through both creature and child. The elders stood, their staff tapping the sand in solemn agreement. "This is not a curse," one declared. "It is a gift, a reminder we must not forget." The people bowed their heads, not in fear, but in respect for the truth before them. The child smiled faintly, feeling the warmth of the sea pulse within her heart. That day, the village's bond with the ocean deepened, not through fear, but through reverence. The dolphins splashed playfully, their song a final blessing upon the gathering. And as the tide rose gently, the villagers knew they had stepped into a new beginning. The days that followed carried a quiet transformation across the village by the sea. Fishermen no longer rushed to cast their nets, but paused to greet the morning tide. They placed a hand on the water, whispering gratitude before setting sail. Mothers drew water from the well with care, listening for the soft hum within. Children ran barefoot along the shore, singing to the dolphins who answered with leaps. Though whispers had changed them, weaving reverence into every corner of daily life. Yet, not all hearts were calm, for doubt still lingered among a few. Some worried the whispers might be a trick, a tide that could turn against them. Others wondered if Poseidon's silence meant approval or a deeper test. The child, however, remained steady, carrying the voice of the floods like a lantern. Each night, she walked to the well, pressing her palm to the stone rim. The whispers greeted her, soft and patient, reminding her that listening was enough. "Remember," they said, "for memory is the anchor that keeps harmony in place." One evening, as stars glittered above, the villagers gathered once more by the shore. The dolphins swam close, circling as though awaiting a new chapter of the story. The elders called the child forward, asking her to speak again for the waters. Her voice trembled at first, but the tide seemed to rise in rhythm with her heart. She told them of balance, of giving back what was taken, of living as part of the circle. She spoke of planting trees near streams, of keeping rivers clean, of honoring the sea's gifts. Her words painted visions in the villagers' minds as vivid as dreams. They saw fertile fields, flowing wells, and nets heavy with fish, but never emptied of life. The elders listened carefully, their faces softened by both wisdom and humility. At last, one elder spoke, his voice carrying across the night air. "We have lived beside the sea for generations, but never have we heard it so clearly." He turned to the people and said, "Let us choose respect over doubt. Let us walk with the waters." The villagers murmured in agreement, voices blending like a gentle tide. Even those with lingering fears felt the pull of the moment, the truth too strong to deny. The child smiled faintly, knowing the village had begun to truly understand. Suddenly, the dolphins leapt high, their bodies glittering under the moonlight. The sea shimmered, and for a heartbeat, the whispers became a song all could hear. The villagers gasped, hands over their hearts, for the melody wrapped around them like silk. It was not loud, not thunderous, but soft and endless, like eternity breathing. The song carried words without language, promises without chains, hope without demand. Tears fell on weathered cheeks, for they felt both small and infinite in its presence. The child whispered, "This is their blessing. This is their memory given to us." The song faded slowly, leaving only the sound of waves folding into the sand. But the silence that followed was not emptiness. It was fullness, brimming with meaning. That night, no one doubted, for the sea had spoken to all, not just the child. The villagers returned to their homes, hearts lightened by reverence, their steps softer on the earth. The child lingered by the well, her eyes reflecting stars and ripples alike. She whispered, "Thank you," and the water shimmered in reply. In that quiet moment, she understood the whispers were not only a voice. They were memory itself, carried in every drop, every wave, every breath of rain. And from that night forward, the village carried the memory too, etched in their souls. They would live differently, walk differently, speak differently, with the ocean inside their hearts. For once a blessing is heard by all, it cannot be forgotten. And the sea, ever patient, would continue whispering until the end of time. The morning after the blessing, the village awoke to a sky painted with soft gold and silver clouds. The air was calm, carrying the scent of salt and the distant murmur of tides. For the first time in memory, the villagers felt the sea not as a boundary, but as kin. They greeted the water with bowed heads, speaking thanks before stepping into their day. The fishermen launched their boats, not in haste, but with songs echoing across the waves. Their nets sank gently, guided by reverence, and rose shimmering with fish in abundance. The women filled their jars, pausing to listen for whispers lingering in the well. Children played at the shore, tracing circles in the sand that echoed the dolphins' dance. The elders watched in silence, sensing change had truly taken root within their people. But the whispers had not grown quiet, for they carried more to be told. That evening, as dusk folded the horizon, the child sat once more by the water. The dolphins surfaced nearby, their movements deliberate, their song weaving with the tide. The whispers rose, not just in her mind, but in the rhythm of waves upon the shore. Memory is not enough, the flood said. Action must follow, or memory fades. The child listened, her heart heavy yet steady, knowing this truth could not be ignored. She asked softly, "What must we do?" The water shimmered under the moonlight, as if answering in light as well as sound. "Protect what flows," the whispers said. "Guard the streams, honor the rivers, respect the sea." Visions filled her mind of forests cut down, rivers clouded, and fish fleeing from poisoned waters. She felt the sorrow of forgotten places where harmony had been broken. Yet, she also saw hope. Trees planted, rivers cleared, hands working with care. The child understood the call was not only for remembrance, but for stewardship. The next morning, she gathered the village once more in the square by the well. Her voice was stronger now, carrying both the innocence of a child and the weight of the sea. "The waters ask more of us," she said, "not only to listen, but to act with respect." The villagers stirred uneasily, for change was not as simple as prayer. Yet the elders nodded, recalling the song that had touched them beneath the stars. One spoke, his voice steady. "If the sea asks, then we must answer." The fishermen promised to take only what they needed, leaving the waters alive with life. The kakis, women vowed to keep the well clean, to draw water with gratitude, not carelessness. The children promised to learn the songs of the dolphins, to carry them into the future. The elders pledged to guide with wisdom, reminding all of the covenant they now held. The child smiled, for she knew the whispers had found fertile ground in every heart. The dolphins leapt in joy, their arcs glistening like blessings cast upon the shore. The whispers hummed low, weaving with the wind, as if pleased with the promise made. That evening, the villagers worked together, planting trees near the stream that fed the well. They gathered stones to mark the riverbank, a reminder of their vow to protect it. Laughter mingled with song, for even in labor they felt the sea's presence near. The child watched with quiet pride, knowing the village had taken its first true step. The whispers softened, wrapping around her like a tide, their message gentle but unending. "Remember," they said again, "for memory fades without hands to carry it forward." The stars glittered above, reflected in the rippling water as if the heavens had bowed. And in that night, the village was no longer merely a place by the sea. It had become part of the sea's song, woven into a story that would never be forgotten. The moon waned, and with it came a new rhythm to the village life by the sea. The people rose earlier, working not just for themselves, but for the land and water alike. They mended nets with patience, shaping them to let the smallest fish slip away unharmed. They carved channels to guide rainwater back into the earth, feeding the roots of trees. Mothers sang lullabies to their children about rivers, oceans, and the bond between them. The whispers grew softer, yet ever present, like a gentle pulse beneath all things. The child, now called the listener, remained their guide, though she never claimed the title. She simply walked with quiet grace, carrying the sea's memory as if it were a lantern. But change, though bright, did not go unnoticed beyond the village shores. Travelers from inland came with tales of parched rivers and cracked earth. They spoke of villages that had forgotten to listen, where drought pressed hard on life. The villagers listened with heavy hearts, for they remembered Poseidon's warning well. The child asked the whispers, "What of them? Do they not deserve to hear the song too?" The water stirred, and the answer came like a ripple across the tide. All rivers lead to the sea, but not all hearts are open to its voice. Her eyes lowered, for she felt the weight of both sorrow and responsibility. Still, she could not turn away, nor could the villagers who had been blessed. They resolved to send messengers inland, carrying water from their well as a gift. Not a gift of possession, but of remembrance, a symbol of harmony restored. The elders filled clay jars, sealing them carefully with cloth and hope. They pressed the jars into the hands of travelers, bidding them to share the memory. "Tell them," they said, "that the sea still waits for their voices to return." The child watched as the jars left, her heart whispering prayers with each step. Nights grew longer, and stars guided the travelers across hills and dry plains. Back in the village, the whispers began to weave new stories into the tide. They spoke of unity, of waters that stretched farther than eyes could see. They reminded the villagers that the covenant was not theirs alone, but for all living. The people gathered at the well, repeating the lessons aloud so none would forget. Even children who once played idly now spoke of streams and trees with care. The dolphins swam closer, circling in patterns that seemed like blessings drawn in water. The child learned to read their dances, understanding them as living verses of the sea. One leap meant joy, another meant warning, a dive meant memories sinking deep. She translated their movements for the people, who marveled at this language of waves. The elders said, "Once we feared the sea, but now it has become our teacher." And in their words lay a truth as deep as any current. For fear had been washed away, replaced with reverence and a sense of belonging. The villagers began to call themselves keepers of the shore, not owners, not rulers. They built small stone altars, not for sacrifice, but for gratitude, offerings of fruit and song. They believed Poseidon's silence was not distance, but trust, letting them learn to walk alone. Still, the child knew the silence carried a weight, as if waiting for their next step. The whispers echoed that thought, weaving into her dreams with gentle insistence. "Do not stop," they said, "for water never rests, and memory never ends." And so, as dawn broke over another day, the village moved with purpose. Hands worked, voices sang, hearts listened, all in rhythm with the tide's eternal beat. They were no longer just a village by the sea. They had become part of a story flowing outward, carried in jars, in words, in memory. And though they did not yet know where the story would lead, they trusted the current. For in every drop, they felt the truth. Poseidon was still with them, whispering through the floods. The season shifted, and with it came winds that carried scents from distant lands across the sea. The villagers gathered on the shore, marveling at how far the air itself had traveled. They spoke of unseen places, mountains and rivers they had never touched with their hands. The child listened too, sensing the whispers growing stronger with each passing tide. They told her The sea does not end here. Its story is larger than your village. She felt both awe and fear, for the thought of something endless was both gift and burden. The dolphins swam in closer circles, as though preparing her for what was to come. One night, beneath a crescent moon, she dreamed of rivers branching like silver veins. They connected villages, forests, and deserts, all flowing back to the same embrace of the sea. When she awoke, her heart was pounding, for the dream felt more real than waking. She gathered the elders and spoke, her voice steady though her hands trembled. The sea wishes us to remember not just ourselves, but all who live where water flows. The elders bowed their heads, sensing the gravity of her words. They remembered the travelers who had left carrying jars of blessed water inland. They wondered if those villages too would hear the song of the sea in time. The whispers stirred again, this time carried on the waves that reached their feet. "Do not hold the song close," they said. "Let it travel, as water always travels." The villagers understood then that their responsibility was not to guard, but to share. So they crafted songs of their own, weaving Poseidon's whispers into words and rhythm. The fishermen sang as they worked, letting the sea itself carry their voices outward. The children sang too, their laughter carried by the wind to unseen shores. Even the elders, who once spoke only in caution, lifted their voices in humble chant. Their songs spoke of memory, of reverence, of the bond between water and life. At night, the sound lingered, echoing across the horizon like a promise. The child smiled, for she knew they had begun to fulfill what the whispers asked. But still, the sea spoke again, patient yet insistent in its call. "Songs are not enough," it said. "Let your hands and hearts shape the world around you." The villagers listened, and soon their lives blossomed into acts of care. They planted more trees, letting roots bind the soil near their rivers. They built channels to carry rainwater into gardens, sharing abundance with all. They cleansed the streams of debris so that fish and birds could return. Every task was simple, yet carried the weight of reverence, as though touched by eternity. The dolphins leapt higher than ever before, their arcs sparkling in the sunlight. It was as though they celebrated each act, each step of harmony restored. The child walked among the people, not as a leader, but as a reminder. Her presence spoke of the floods and the song, of Poseidon's memory living in them all. The whispers softened, like a lullaby sung to a child resting in safety. "Do not forget," they said again, the words woven into every wave. The elders declared a new practice. Each season they would gather at the shore. There they would tell the story again, so no ear, young or old, would lose it. They would pass the memory like a torch, from heart to heart, generation to generation. And so the village's bond with the sea deepened into something timeless. It was no longer a place of labor and fear, but of kinship and devotion. Each day carried whispers, each night carried songs, each heart carried memory. The child often wondered if Poseidon listened still, somewhere in the vastness. And in the rustle of waves, in the shimmer of tides, she always found her answer. For silence itself had become a voice, reminding her that the sea never forgets. The years passed, and the village grew in harmony with the sea, as though guided by an invisible hand. Children who once played at the shore grew into adults who carried the memory in their hearts. They taught their own children to bow before the tide, to listen before speaking, to give before taking. The whispers, though softer now, still flowed through the wells, rivers, and songs of the people. They had become a rhythm of life, a truth carried in every wave, every drop, every breath of rain. The child who had first heard the whispers grew into a young woman, her eyes deep as the ocean. She no longer needed to ask questions, for the answers lived within her silence. She understood now that Poseidon's gift was not a command, but an invitation. An invitation to live with reverence, to carry the sea inside every choice and every action. The villagers honored this truth not with grand temples or sacrifices, but with small, steady devotion. They planted, they cleansed, they listened, they remembered. Each act a prayer, each breath a hymn. The dolphins remained near, guardians of the waters, teachers of the songs unspoken. Their leaps became symbols of joy, their circles a reminder of the endless bond. The elders aged gracefully, their voices softer, yet their wisdom carried further than before. They told the story again and again, each telling a ripple that reached beyond the shore. Travelers came and went, carrying jars of water, carrying songs, carrying memory. And slowly, villages far inland began to hear the echo of the sea within themselves. Not always as whispers, but as dreams, as visions, as sudden reverence for a river long ignored. The song of Poseidon had traveled farther than anyone could measure, as boundless as the tide. The young woman stood one evening on the shore, her feet in the foam, her gaze on the horizon. She felt the vastness pressing close, not as fear, but as kinship unbroken. And for the first time, she whispered back, not asking, not waiting, but answering. "We remember. We will not forget. We are yours and you are ours." The sea shimmered in reply, a quiet acknowledgement, a blessing carried in silence. No voice thundered, no storm rose, no miracle appeared. Only the calm of truth fulfilled. For the covenant was never about power, but about belonging, about memory, about care. The villagers joined her at the shore, lifting their voices in song that needed no words. Their harmony blended with the tide, carrying gratitude outward into the endless deep. Above them, the stars reflected in the waves, as though the sky itself had bowed to listen. The dolphins leapt once more, tracing arcs that seemed to seal the story in light. The whispers did not end, for whispers never truly end. They linger in the heart, in the soil, in the streams, in the very breath of the earth. The young woman turned to the children gathered near, their eyes wide with wonder. "Remember this," she told them gently. "Memory is the anchor. Without it, we drift." The children nodded, holding her words as tightly as they once held shells and stones. And so the story passed on, generation to generation, like a river flowing without end. Not just a story of a god and his floods, but of people who chose to listen. A story of reverence stronger than fear, of memory stronger than forgetting. The sea did not claim them, nor did they claim the sea. Instead, they walked together, tide and village, voice and silence, forever bound. And though centuries would come and go, the song of Poseidon and the whispering floods would remain, not carved in stone, not sealed in temples, but living in hearts, carried in every act of care. For as long as water flows and voices rise, the covenant endures, and the sea, patient and eternal, continues to whisper, waiting for us all to listen.